Good evening, everyone. Good to be together. If I've not had a chance to meet you, I'm Jay. It's good to meet you. I am back home in Ohio, the heart of it all. Seriously, always, everywhere I go, everywhere I speak, I always say, I am from Columbus, Ohio, home of the Ohio State University. And it never goes like that, for what it's worth. What just happened? There's a ton of booing. It's a mess. And I usually retort by saying people always hate on winners. And again, they just boo more. So I'm very excited to be able to do that with you this evening. So we are celebrating 50 years. For some of you in this room, you're like, it's not that big a deal. I'm presently 47, so it's a long time for me. Might not be a long time for you, but it's a long time for me. And I've never worn Hawaiian shirts, but here I am again, wearing a Hawaiian shirt. There's a few of you who did not know we were doing that to celebrate, and you just slid right in. You're like, wow. You don't have to tell anyone. You can just act like you knew the whole time. Because for some of you, you didn't know that we've not been doing that recently. But I'm glad you did tonight. Really glad. It was just a little over, it was a month and some ago that I was in West LA, the first vineyard that was planted, where we had Kenn join us by video, and Joni came to share. Brad Bailey hosted us for a really, really fun celebration. There were lots of stories, and it was just really, really fun to hear the stories. I think we were scheduled for that time total to be an hour and a half to 2 hours. You know, they were like, man, if it goes a long time, it'll be 2 hours. And 3.5 hours later, we were wrapping up the stories because people were effusive. They wanted to tell the stories of what they've experienced and what this thing called the Vineyard has meant to them. So we're not going to have 3 hours tonight. So I'm happy to report that. But I really do think over this entire week we are celebrating and we are looking forward. We've titled this conference Seed and Soil, which what we're looking at is what is the soil in which has been created for this thing called the vineyard to grow. How was the soil receptive to the seeds of God's kingdom? And so you'll see throughout this week, we're looking in the mornings, really focusing on soil. How does God want us to continue to prepare our hearts to receive what God has for us? And then the afternoons will mostly focus on those seeds. What are those seeds of the kingdom that are still being sown into us that we will continue to grow and develop in who God has called us to be as the vineyard? So that's going to be sort of the theme. You'll notice that in the morning and into the afternoon. So that's sort of the idea of what we're doing. But as we think tonight, just sort of setting the whole thing up, what is the soil that birthed this thing called the vineyard? If you've been in ministry more than a week, you've had the horrific experience of realizing that some of what you do doesn't work. Just a very small percentage, of course, that you do. You plan, you pray, you prepare, you deliver, you make schedules and spreadsheets and PowerPoints, and your worship team prays and prepares, and all together you're like, this is going to be great. And sometimes it's not great. I know I'm just maybe speaking to a small percentage of you. And it's more mystifying than that. It's not just what you can observe versus what you can't observe. It can be really confusing because if you've done this again for any amount of time, you will often do things in the kingdom and in your church or with leaders. And for some of those people, it goes like really, really well. You see like massive transformation in their life. And yet there's people that are right next to them that, how do we say this delicately? You don't see massive transformation. If we're honest, you can often have people in the same room going through the same experiences over years where some are growing and thriving and developing and others seem to be getting worse. Have you ever had this experience? Have you been in church? Because if you've not had this experience, you've not noticed people getting worse in the same environment people are growing in. If you've not noticed this as a pastor, it must be you. Should we start ministry now? Because it's so common. It's really common. And this, honestly, as a pastor, as a leader, can be really mystifying. It can be really confusing. And the truth is, the scriptures give us good reason for this. That the seed can be good, but the soil might not be receptive. The seed of the kingdom is good, but has the soil of our hearts been turned over to receive? And not just one time, but does the soil remain receptive? What's clear is that this thing that we're in called the Vineyard has been a move of God. God has done a thing. The question is, why us? And there's a way to describe that. One way to describe that is, it's just a miracle, right? Like God did this thing, and it's a sovereign move of God, and God did everything, and it just sort of happened. And we were in a moment where things just sort of happened. And that there is a way to describe it that way. But it's also true that God doesn't just make us puppets. And there are things that God can only do. He just does it. But there's also another set of things it seems that God just asks us to do. To be obedient, right? Like we're just to obey. Whether it's a thing that God is doing or not, there's ways that God asks us to be obedient. Things that we're supposed to do with our money and our bodies and our time and our relationships. We're just to be obedient. But there's this middle ground. There's this ground where it seems like God does what he does as we do what we do. As we've prepared our hearts and our lives and the people that we lead, the soil is built in such a way that we can receive this thing from God. As I've just been praying and thinking about our time together, I think for many of us, it might be time for that soil to be turned over again. To receive the thing that God intends for our life. There is a part that is up to us to prepare our hearts to receive what God has for us. And as I've been around and been listening to and hearing stories of the Vineyard from 50 years, it sure seems like there were a group of people who were turning their hearts over and turning their lives over in such a way that they were prepared to receive what God was giving. And that we now are beneficiaries of that fruit. So I was honored and privileged to have some time to sit with Kenn Gulliksen. Many of you know that Kenn has struggled with all kinds of different health things really throughout most of his adult life, but especially more recently. But we had an opportunity to sit with Kenn, and at the risk of sounding a little bit super spiritual, it was genuinely a miraculous time sitting with him. If you've known Kenn and Joni for any amount of time, Kenn isn't often able to sit and talk for long periods of time, but we spent a few hours with him, which he later said was maybe the longest he's been able to sit and talk with someone in many, many years. So that felt like a miracle. But we took some of that interview and cut it down into pieces. And here's what I want you to listen for as we watch this interview. I want you to listen for what was sort of happening in the soil of the hearts of these people that were just a few small groups that made them receptive to the seeds of the kingdom. And in that, what is our heritage? What is it that God might require of us afresh to prepare our hearts for how God wants to continue to grow this thing called the Vineyard? So can you listen for that in this interview? Okay, so let's listen for that, and I'll come back up and work some of the text that Ken opens up for us.
We felt that we were called to go up to LA to plant the church. Brent Rue, 7'10", also felt called, and he came with us. We wound up going to plant the church. We went to Chuck Girard's, and Chuck opened up his home, and all the musicians showed up. And many came to the Lord, and his house and room were packed. They were too far out from where we thought we should be. We thought we were supposed to be more in the Beverly Hills area, not for status, but because God had put it in our hearts. So we stayed with Chuck and continued there, while at the same time, Larry Norman, the singer-musician, and his wife, Pam, invited us to do a Bible study in their home in West Hollywood. And we thought, sure.
Okay. Yeah.
So we went to West Hollywood. We started a study. It was a great time. The Holy Spirit spoke to us. He wanted us to go to Beverly Hills. There was a house that was going to be given to us to live in, 2 families. We started this Bible study in a home that was freely given to us as a home because no one lived there. And it's confused, but the owner allowed us to use this home. And they probably could fit 150 people in this living room. It was so huge. And we took people in to stay. Poor Joni had to be the chief cook, bottle watch, and a diaper changer for all the women and all who came and stayed with us. But the church grew. It was the beginning. That was the beginning of the Vineyard Christian Fellowship. I remember Keith Green and Melody sitting in the front row, almost on the floor, front row. And Keith got excited when he came and he saw what the Lord was doing. And it was in my mind, it was that night that the church turned into a genuine church. So with Keith and Melody, then came many other movie stars, if you want to call them that, and well-known people whom we came to know as dear and are still dear, close friends. We didn't struggle, we didn't try, we just showed up.
Yeah, and talk about that. What was marking those meetings? I mean, people are coming, they're bringing their friends, they seem to be excited. Why? What's happening that people are like, oh man, we got to go to this random house?
It was a season of time. It wasn't my pretty face, I can tell you that. It was a season of time when God was at work. God was doing stuff. And people were hearing about Jesus and somehow responding. It was totally supernatural. And this small room space grew huge. And this whole room was packed out with people. And we had a couple families living there. But the meetings packed out. You couldn't get more people in there if you tried. And I just sat and played the guitar and taught the Bible. The one thing I was gifted to do was to teach. That was my gift. And they sat on the floor, the chairs, everywhere, and listened. And we prayed for them. We laid hands on them. They were baptized in the Spirit. They were saved. Their hearts were purified. Their lives were purified. I would hear stories of how their lives changed. I heard the story about up the street. They were concerned about where did all the people go one week. Turns out those folks up the street supposedly were going to another Bible study, but it wasn't a Bible study. It was a skinny dip study. It was all of these Christian kids had gone up to this big mansion house where there's a big pool, and they just went skinny dipping.
Well, that'll gather a crowd.
Sounded good to me. I'm a Norwegian, remember?
That's so good.
It wasn't long where they came back, genuine repentance,
Right.
and I mean, the real deal,
Yeah.
and fully part of our fellowship. And then little by little, more and more individuals either did fantastic things or crazy weird things. People like the Hillside Strangler. There were people with that kind of genre. They would show up. We had to work with the police because
Because they're just turning up. Yeah.
we're in the heart of Beverly Hills. There's a crowd showing up.
Right.
So do they.
Yeah.
So we do our best to figure out who's on first.
Yeah.
We then felt God called us to start a school of discipleship. So I did. We over the hill. We rented several rooms, called it the School of Discipleship. 4 of my pastors pastored with me in the school. And that was the school where 6 months later, Bob Dylan became a member of the school, and his lovely girlfriend who brought him, and he went through the whole school.
Yeah.
And the school was very successful, but then it was time to move on. And there were people that were moving on to plant churches, moving on to do other things. We planted a church out in the valley, in the desert, in different parts of the country.
Because they were just doing it. Like, we should just take this over there.
Yeah, and they asked permission. And I always prayed about it, checked it out, really sought the Lord. And God gave grace. And for the most part, they're all serving the Lord. Incredible. And this all started with us sitting in Chuck Girard's living room
Yeah.
with a bunch of nobodies singing Jesus songs. How in the world can you not stand in awe of a God who loves his people, and his people who are not yet his people, to the extent that he reaches out to say, you, I want you. I love you. And then the next week, there are twice as many people. And then the next week, the School of Discipleship is full. And
Right.
it's like, what?
What is this?
World?
And why? I've often.
I'm sorry.
What? Don't. You're not allowed to be sorry.
All right.
Yeah. Why is it called the Vineyard? So I joke around with a lot of Vineyard pastors that there's hardly any group of people that use their name and don't describe it like ever. And a lot of vineyards, they're like, I don't even know why we're called the Vineyard. Why are we called the
In the
Vineyard?
beginning. The vineyard in the beginning?
Well, yeah. I mean, why?
Yeah. God told me to name it the Vineyard. End of story. I was reading scripture and just studying, and I came a section that was about the vineyards, the Old Testament vineyards and the thing, and it just flooded me. Can't even explain it. I was overwhelmed with the impression, the word, you are the vineyard. You are the 4 words. That's all I got from the Lord. I went away home that night, and it was, we're the vineyard. Without question, but without total knowledge.
Complete clarity. Yeah, right.
But as I studied scripture, it came to understand, wow, the soil, the seed, the planting, every word you could think of that had to do with the vineyard somehow connected with the concept of pruning. And everybody, I think I explained that's not necessarily a good thing, you know. It's God's working in you, pruning you to bear forth fruit constantly.
Yes.
New fruit constantly, and with all the, and the Lord quickened to me. It was all of those things. It wasn't any one particular,
Yeah. Not just one piece, not just one
piece,
word.
value. Yeah,
Value. Yeah, it was all of it.
it was all the above. It was the one thing in the Bible that was all the rest. That was all the rest. That covered all the rest of what of it. It was like, wow. And people are leaving that night. We're the vineyard. We're the vineyard. We're the vineyard. And
Well, and when you've shared with me about this, you've talked about different things, but you always talk about John 15 and that, every vine in me that does not bear fruit, he prunes so that it will bear more fruit, or remain in me and I will remain in you.
yeah.
So talk a bit about how that passage helps you understand what you think it is that we're the vineyard.
Well, very, very simply, I finished college, but I'm not a philosopher. To me, it's just very simply that he plants, he prunes, everything you could think of in the life of a believer that was necessary for healthy fruit that remains. It comes from seed. Even the color is the color of the blood of Jesus. It's planted in the ground by seed. It has to be planted by seed. The juice comes out under the sun. It has to be matured. You harvest it.
Yeah.
All. Think of it all.
It is.
It's all. It's like incredible.
Well, and engrafted in the love
Yes.
of Jesus.
Yes.
If you remain in
And
me.
he said,
Yeah.
I am the vine. That was the biggest one.
Yeah.
And you are the branches.
Remain in my love will remain in you.
You.
And you will bear much fruit, showing
Yes.
yourselves
Promise.
to be my disciples.
Yes. You're asking me?
And it's so that my joy would be in you.
Yep.
And it would be complete.
Yep.
That's a good legacy to be the vineyard.
Yep. Yes,
May
it
that
is.
be true of us.
You got ahead of me there. You did.
I
you
just
did.
love the text.
You did quite well. I had to space and think. Okay. You read,
I'm repeating your words. Yeah.
but on the bulletin, there's not enough room, so you just put I am the fruit, and then
yeah, what do you just say?
yeah.
I'm the vine, you're the branches.
What?
Remain in me.
I
I'll
think
remain.
that's the best name for a church that was ever invented, and it came from Jesus, and He gave it to us. I think. Do I dare say this?
You dare say it.
I think He especially loves us. I think he loves us specially. I don't know why, but I think he has a special love for us. Go figure. You know, I know he loves all of his children, but he loves the Vineyard.
Isn't that beautiful? Really, really powerful. Whew, it's a little emotional for me. I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful. We do stand on the shoulders of giants. I'm very, very grateful. Well, the text that I taught to Ken is John. That's why I'm telling it from now on. John chapter 15. Jesus, the master teacher. For those of you who know the text, you know that it's in the middle of him preparing to be betrayed. He's been betrayed, and it's his last time with his guys before he's heading to the cross. He says this, John 15, I am the true vine. My Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit he prunes, so it will be even more fruitful. Most people, commentators that look at this text would say that translation might not be the best translation, as a side note. Instead of it saying he cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, most New Testament people who are looking at this text now would say that it would probably be better translated, he lifts up. He lifts up, so it kind of needs a trellis, needs some help. Lifts it up. He says then, you're already clean because of the word that I've spoken to you. Remain in me as I also remain in you. No branch can bear fruit by itself. It must remain in the vine. Neither can you bear fruit unless you remain in me. And Jesus, again, the master teacher, communicator, is going to repeat himself multiple times in this text. Because effective leaders, effective communicators, say the same kinds of things over and over. They repeat themselves. So if you want to be a good leader, you take things that you're saying and you say them again and again. Content that's delivered well by good leaders is said in the same ways, but different, in repetition. When you come to something that's important, and you want to make sure that's articulated, you take the words and you move them around a little, but you say them again so that they really stick. There's a few of you that don't know what just happened. Ask somebody later. It's worth thinking about. So here he is doing it, verse 5. I am the vine, you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Listen to that promise. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. You will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do a few things fairly well. Oh, that's not true. The text actually says, apart from me, you can do nothing. Apart from me, you can do nothing. If you do not remain in me, you're like a branch that's thrown away. It withers. Such branches are picked up, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you remain in me and my words remain in you, ask whatever you wish, it will be done for you. This is to my Father's glory, that you bear much fruit, showing yourselves to be my disciples. What does it mean to remain in Jesus? This is such a complicated metaphor. What does this mean? Well, he says, as the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Here it is, remain in my love. If you keep my commands, you'll remain in my love, just as I've kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. I have told you this. Why? So that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. This text is so clear. It's so direct. It's so simple, and yet really, really challenging to live out. Really challenging to live out. I know I'm in a room full of teachers and communicators. So let me just say back to you what you probably know about this text, but it bears repeating. The verb forms that are used here by way of remain are in the present active, meaning remain and keep on remaining. They denote that attachment is continuous and continual. And that attachment in love is necessary then to bear fruit. I'm going to do a magic trick for you right now. Are you ready? Here it is. Here's the magic trick. Some of you can see me. You can see me on the screens. Here it is. Impressive. We had one person clap. Thanks, Mom. She felt bad for me. She's like, I think Jay's struggling. I'm going to give him a little clap. That wasn't that good. But here's what you don't realize. It is difficult to describe how many things happen in a row for that to happen. Blood vessels, nerves, tendons, muscles, bones connected to your brain. They all happen in this incredible order. The process required is it's a miracle. That this thing over here responds to what I tell it to do. Now, if you remove my arm from my body, this little magic trick is really hard to do. It's simple, and yet incredibly complicated. The nourishment required, the connection required, how continuous and consistent. And yet, in one sense, it feels effortless because it's all working together the right way. This is the image Jesus is giving. The image he's giving is that this is how it's supposed to work, but you have to be connected. You have to be connected continuously, continually in your theological accuracy. In your moral purity, in your powerful giftedness. No, it doesn't say that. Remain in my love, and I will remain in you. Texts like this are complicated, right? Because it feels like hyperbole. Jesus is saying, you can do nothing apart from me. Is that technically true? Sure seems like a lot of people are doing a lot of things without Jesus. All over, right? I mean, it's not technically true. You can do all kinds of things without Jesus, it turns out. Lots of people do. Lots of people around you do. I think the thing Jesus is getting after is it's possible to do a certain kind of ministry without Jesus. It's possible to have a certain kind of spirituality without the love of Jesus. It's possible to build certain mechanisms and tricks and methods that mirror a certain kind of fruit. Now, to be clear, what Jesus says is that will not last. There is a way to do things out of duty. And don't get me wrong, Sometimes you just do the things because of the right things to do. Don't get me wrong. But that can't be the way you keep living. That can't be the way you continue to live. That can't be the way that your life and ministry works. But because, listen, I'm in a room full of leaders. You don't just have to be a lead pastor. You can be a worship pastor. You can be serving in your church leading. You know that there's ways that you can do stuff that looks like fruit just because you kind of muscle it a certain way. Or you learn some techniques. There's ways to look prophetic or apostolic and actually just be a total jerk. And completely disconnected from the mercy and the love of Jesus. There's a way that you can talk about revival and be really excited about it. Contort your face, shout and sweat, flex, and be full of nothing that resembles the love of God. There's a way that worship leaders can play that minor chord ever so perfectly at the right time and stare off in the distance, bite their lip. I did that right now, and some of you are like, yeah, that's it. That's when it's happened. Yes. We've had a bit of this in our movement if you haven't paid attention. The scriptures say this over and over again in such a way that, frankly, if you're in anything that resembles ministry, it should cause you to pause and have the fear of God from time to time. Paul says it very directly. In the passage in 1 Corinthians 13 that people read at weddings, which should not be read at weddings, because it has nothing to do with a wedding. It has everything to do the way the church is to function within her gifts. 1 Corinthians 13, Paul says it like this: if I speak in the tongues of men or of angels, but do not have love, I'm only a resounding gong or a clanging cymbal. If I have the gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have faith that can move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give all I possess to the poor and give over my body to hardship that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Paul is looking at this church that loves gifts and loves power and loves the ministry of the Spirit. And he's saying, I'm concerned about you because there's a whole bunch of ways you guys operate that isn't grounded and rooted in love. And the bad fruit is showing up all around you. There's power, there's gifts, there's a lot of excitement, but there's a lot of other stuff. And it's dangerous. It's going to produce something that's broken and messed up over time. We have a bit of this. We've had a bit of this in the history of our movement. The soil of being humble and loving and gracious is the soil by which these seeds of the kingdom flourish. Effectively, beautifully, that produce fruit that last. This is our heritage. I listened to John Wimber teach this text. I found 3 different audios of him teaching this and then one written. And about 75% of the teaching was about the same when he taught this in John 15. But he used one funny illustration, which I really, really liked. And the illustration was, he said, that every year he has this big problem that happens, that there's all this racket in the backyard, all this noise. And there's this clamoring and, all this noise, almost like shouting sounds. And the banging and the racket is so loud that the neighbors come over and go, what's going on in your backyard? Sometimes they've called the police, and he says, because I have this peach tree, and it's so much work for it to just produce this peach. It's like, and then the peach comes out. It's just a lot of shouting. It's a lot of noise. And then he pauses and goes, I'm sorry, I was lying. There's actually no noise at all. There's nothing. Because if the tree is rooted in the right soil, it produces fruit that lasts. This is not meant to be some effort-filled thing. If there is an effort to be applied, it is to remain in the mercy and in the love of Jesus. That you should be enamored with him. That just the thought of him breaks your heart. That you still soften in worship. You still love the scriptures. Listen, there's a way that people do ministry that we lose our hearts. And I just want to say, as clear as I can, we got a lot of hard things we're going to have to do. But if we are not grounded in love, we have no hope. If we are not grounded in the present mercy of God that's given by his presence every single day, we have no hope. Nothing we do will last. If I'm going to be a little more personal, I don't know about you, but the last few years for me in ministry, I had no idea how mean Christians could be. I had no idea. I mean, again, I've been in ministry my entire adult life. I had no idea they could be this mean. I had no idea how mean pastors could be. And how easily they can justify that mean, competitive, aggressive spirit in the name of ministry, in the name of producing fruit. Now, there's a number of you shaking your head going, oh, those horrible people. Pause just a moment and think about those people in your church that are horribly annoying. Got a few of those? Just pause just a second. Hold them in front of you. And then think about you again. Can I tell you that when you move out of everything being duty and it becoming mercy and love, even the annoying people can be loved? Even the annoying people, even the hurtful people. Even, I know this sounds like I'm offering you some kind of miracle because it is a miracle, but even betrayal can lead you to the mercy of God. It can lead you to the mercy of God. You can find your way into the mercy and the love of God. And if we are not flowing and moving out of that mercy and that love, I just want to say it as clearly as I know how. Everything else we do in the vineyard will be in vain. For it is only the mercy and the love of the Father that's found in Jesus Christ. If I'm just going to speak to a little more directly, I think the best of us, Vineyard, is when we're a little sappy. Can I just be honest? Like, have you heard our worship songs? Like, the best worship songs we have are a little sappy. They're a little cheesy. They make you blush a little bit when you sing them, like, oh, this is a little too much, you know. Right? You ever had it's a little too much. It's a little too intimate. It's a little too sweet. And I just want to say that's the best of us. That's the best of us. And there's some of you in this room tonight, it's like the Spirit of God is breaking through and saying, do you remember how it was with me? Do you remember when you just loved the Bible? That challenge in Revelation where God says to a church at Revelation 2 says, you know, you've done all these incredible things, but I have this thing against you. You've forgotten your first love. Return to the things you did formerly. I think this is the soil in which the vineyard has been birthed. And this is the soil in which God will continue to bless us. Is being a little sappy, like a little sweet. And that the worship of God that we give brings us to tears and builds a kind of intimacy that enables us to do the rest. I think for many of you tonight might be the night that you reset some things. You turn that soil over. It's the old preacher's story, the self-finish of, the husband that goes to his wife and says, wife, this is the arbitrary day that we set to get married 10 years ago. And so, as is the custom of our people, I've cut some plants that many find appealing to the eye, and I hand them to you, which is again of the custom of our people. Happy anniversary. That guy might not live after that. Like, that's a problem. That's like a real problem. He did what he was supposed to do. He did it out of duty, but something's wrong. If I ask you, tell me about your marriage, you say, the wedding, it was great. 25 years ago, everyone was there. It's beautiful. I just learned something about you. I learned something about your marriage. If I ask you about what you love about Jesus and you want to tell me something about the Vineyard in 1981, that's a problem. Because the mercies of God are available to us today. Fresh mercy, fresh love, fresh worship, fresh passion. May God refresh us again today, this week. I know some of you come here with your notebook out going, I bet they're going to give me 3 techniques that are going to change my church. I got 1. Fall in love with Jesus. Let the passion of Jesus drive your life afresh. And I'm confident you can learn the rest. Amen? Can we stand together?